Okay, so this is a video on week 3. It's actually the second week of our online school, and this is a website that I set up for you guys as a link, and in it was an activity. So this is a bio coach activity, and an animal cell or plant cell, they both have mitochondria, and it's taking oxygen out of the air and making ATP for the plant. ATP is the fuel for everything. So here we have a picture, and capture that picture. So you can see that glucose is like sugar. It's going to go through glycolysis. It's going to give us some ATP, not much, but some. And it's breaking it down, and that's happening outside of the mitochondria. Its product will go into the mitochondria, and it's going to get changed to another format called acetyl-CoA. It's going to go into the Krebs cycle. You can see here that we're getting 6 carbon dioxides out. We're taking all that sugar, breaking it down. Through the Krebs cycle, we're getting some ATP out, and we're getting some material that's being added. It's eventually going to an electron chain and electron transport chain. This is where the oxygen comes in and the water comes out, and we get lots of ATP. And so glycolysis. So glucose, for simplification, we think of it as a 6 carbon chain. It's going to take some energy to break it down, so it makes ADPs. These are another molecule like ATP, but slightly different. And it's also getting charged. And then you have 4 ADPs until you get out 4 ATPs. So even though it took energy to break this down, we get a net gain of 2 ATPs. All right. So on that previous slide, that was all happening outside of the mitochondria. And you got pyruvate. It's a 3 carbon chain. And again, don't be too concerned about all of this stuff. Just see that what we're doing is we're taking that pyruvate, we're going to break it down into another molecule. So it's, we're releasing the carbon there. It's going to come in as a 2 carbon molecule. It's going to enter the Krebs cycle. And again, it's going to be broken down, and we get 2 carbon dioxides out. So that's our 3 carbon dioxides. And this is going to happen twice because there are 2 pyruvates from the previous example. Okay, so this is the molecular, what's happening. Don't worry too much about that. And now this is fermentation. It's a little bit different. And again, so from a glucose, we're getting 36 ATP. All right, and then there's a self-quiz. And I'll let you guys do that on your own. All right, let's go All right, so this is the reading assignment. So cellular respiration, that's our main concept for today. And we're looking at things that are electron carriers. And we may not get to all of this between alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Now, the one that you guys are probably most familiar with, you may not know it, is lactic acid. So this is when you exercise and your legs start burning. And it's what's happening is as you exercise, your blood can't carry enough oxygen. So what happens is your muscles are needing ATP in order to move. And so the lactic acid, it builds up in your muscles and you start aching. And so that ache in your leg is an acid that's built up. Now, the cool thing is if you just stop and breathe, oxygen will come in and break down that lactic acid and the pain will go away. But lactic acid is when you're exercising, your muscles aren't getting enough oxygen, but you're still trying to move. So it's breaking down glycolysis, but not with oxygen. Without oxygen, it's anaerobic, and so it builds up lactic acid. So that's kind of a cool lesson there. All right, so this should look very familiar to you, like photosynthesis, but backwards. So we start with the glucose and 6 oxygens. We're going to get 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water, and energy in the form of ATP. And glycolysis is anaerobic process, doesn't need oxygen. And glycolysis followed by an aerobic process, which requires the presence of oxygen. And so that pyruvate is broken down and ATP is made. And there are 2 parts. There's a Krebs cycle and electron transport. So this is probably one of the most important little areas in that reading I gave you. Okay, during glycolysis, so we saw that earlier. It's a lot easier instead of reading it, looking at a picture. Okay, so glucose, think of it as a 6-carbon chain. It's using ATP to break it down. You're getting 4 ATPs out and some NADHs. Those are electron transport carriers, and 2 pyruvate. Krebs cycle. So we saw that. So in the Krebs cycle, again, that pyruvate comes in. It's going to be broken down as it enters the mitochondria. You're going to get a carbon dioxide and a 2-carbon molecule. That's going to go through the Krebs cycle. And we're going to get 2 more carbon dioxide as that's completely broken down. And we're charging up the NADH and the FAD. Okay. Now what it shows, those 2 little dots, each of those dots represent electrons. Now, that's going to be setting up for the next part, which is the electron transport. So electrons are passed along a series of proteins. Electrons and proteins are released from NADH and FADH2 into the mitochondria, and that's going to make ATP. So there's a table, glycolysis, and that's in the cytoplasm. And the next 2 are in the mitochondria. And what we're getting from each step. And so a lot of these NADHs, the 2, the 8, and the 2, they're helping to make 28 ATPs. So we get 2, 4, so that's 32 ATPs. Okay, and prokaryotes, they don't have, they have no mitochondria, but they're able to do this process as well. But they're going to get more, they're going to get 38 molecules of ATP. Anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic means no oxygen, so do not need oxygen. So fermentation, so that's how bread, you can use yeast. Yeast will eat sugar and release carbon dioxide, and that's going to make your bread have fluffiness, the little air bubbles, certain cheeses, and alcohol as well, like beer, when it ferments. That's where it's getting those bubbles. And there's different types of fermentation and lactic acid. So again, that's when you're running. It can also be used to make foods like cheese, yogurt, and sour cream. Right. And so an overview. Notice it's got sunlight. It's kind of small right there. There's sunlight. So this is our chloroplast. Right there, chloroplast. It's going to make glucose. That's going to be broken down to make ATP. It's going to come in here, make carbon dioxide, and that's going to go back over here. So you got the Krebs cycle over here, Calvin cycle over here. Sunlight's coming in. You got some electron transport similar to electron transport here. And again, you got water that's coming in here, oxygen that's coming out here. And so it's a very balanced system. And so you get that equation that I showed you earlier. Take a quick. Again, you could write this two different directions. This side would be the chloroplast sunlight side, and this is the aerobic side. All right. Organisms attain energy in a process called blank. So sounds like cellular respiration. This process harvests electrons from carbon compounds such as and it sounds like that's glucose. And uses that energy to make ATP. ATP is used to provide energy. Cells to work in blank. Glucose is broken down. All the way in the cytoplasm. Glucose broken down. Glycolysis is a anaerobic. Anaerobic because it doesn't require oxygen. Glycolysis takes place in the and oh yeah. Okay, so this is cytoplasm. And up here they want glycolysis. Two molecules of ATP and two molecules of blank are formed. That's the NADH. They list the ATP for every glucose molecule that is broken down. So, and then aerobic, that means it needs oxygen, takes place in the mitochondria. It is aerobic because the process requires oxygen. All right. Okay, so we got 4 steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So this is a 3-carbon into pyruvate. So pyruvate is right here. So that sounds like step 1. No. Oh, step 2. Step 2, because we got a 3-carbon, and it's going to be moved down. So there's your 3-carbon. All right. The 6-carbon is broken down. That's number 1. So you got a 6-carbon. Phosphate groups from 2 ATP transfer to glucose molecule. Oh, shoot. Step 2. All right. 3-carbon pyruvate. So pyruvate's clear down here. All right, I was missing that. So that's step 4. Let's just do step 1 because you got a 6-carbon. All right, I looked at this earlier. Now, okay, so the only place that's is here, so that's got to be step 3. Okay. All right, so I think this is 1. Because this is the ATP tier. So this has to be 2. So right, step 2, that's where the carbon is not being broken down. All right, so that's a little confusing because it says a 6-carbon. All right, how many ATP molecules are produced? So you got 2 going in, you're getting 4 out. You have a net. The total, we'd say 2, 4. So 4 made, but we have a net of 2. We use 2. All right. What is the net yield of ATP produced by each of the circle process in the diagram? Glycolysis. So we got 2 Krebs cycle 2, and we get 32. So the total yield is is 36. Based on the diagram in your calculation, which process produces more energy, the anaerobic pathway or the aerobic? And it's pretty obvious. Down here, this is the aerobic. And that's why when you're exercising and your body's not getting enough oxygen, you get that buildup of lactic acid because your body is demanding ATP. And so it doesn't need oxygen. So it's able to do this, but after a while, the lactic acid builds up and you need oxygen. That's why some people get that, what they call a second wind, is their body gets good at producing ATP with oxygen. All right. I think we got one more. All right, the anaerobic pathway that follows glycolysis in the absence of fermentation sounds like true. The hydrogen necessary in the electron transport chain comes from the splitting of carbon dioxide molecules. Sounds like false, because carbon dioxide is your result. That's the result. So we have larger carbon chains that are broken down to get those electrons. Cellular respiration in eukaryotes is slightly more efficient and slightly less. So that was one of the slides that I showed you earlier. Krebs cycle is sometimes called the TCA cycle. I believe that's true. Fermentation occurs in the mitochondria. False. So that glycolysis is happening outside of the mitochondria. The mitochondria is using oxygen. It's true. And let's look back at the reading for that one. Yeast and some bacteria undergo a type of fermentation known as alcoholic. So no mention of humans. So I would say false. The two pyruvate molecules formed during glycolysis result in two Krebs cycles. It's true. Electrons transport is the first step in the breakdown of glucose, and that's false. Electron transport is near the end. All right. So to me, images like this make it a little easier to understand what's happening. Because this is much clearer that you got a 6 carbon chain. Now that other diagram had some other steps. Just know that it's going to make 2 pyruvate, and there are steps along the way to get to that final stage. And again, this is showing how carbon dioxide is being broken down and carbon's being released from breaking down the carbon dioxide, and it's producing all of these electrons. And this is for 1 pyruvate. So there are, remember, 2 pyruvates. That's going to multiply everything by 2. Times 2, times 2, times 2, times 2, times 2, times 2. So you get that 6 carbon dioxide total. And we are done.